When I was 6 years old, I became preoccupied with the problem of trying to find something that was truly permanent, something that couldn't be destroyed or decay. I'm not entirely sure why this became so important to me. It seems to me that it was somehow linked with an attempt to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to do something that would last, something that would be around long after I was dead. In fact, what I really wanted was to make something that would last forever. By the way, if you've been thinking, based on all the things that I've been telling you about myself as a kid, that I must have been a pretty strange little boy, I'd have to say that you're probably right. I remember sitting in my first grade classroom, lost in my own world, brooding about things that last, while the teacher was talking about something entirely different. I can clearly recall thinking, well, I like drawing. I could become an artist. But then I think, no, paper doesn't last. Anyone can just tear it up. Then I think, well, what about houses? Houses are made of wood, and wood is solid. I could build houses. Only then I'd remember about fire and the wooden houses I had seen that had toppled over. Next, I considered metal, but then remembered the junkyard filled with rusted and decaying machinery. Finally, I hit upon stone. And at stone, I felt a great surge of relief. Stone, of course! Nothing can destroy stone. Not long afterwards, though, our teacher showed us a picture of the Sphinx in Egypt, and I saw how weathered and broken it was. With that, I felt completely defeated. There's nothing, I thought. Nothing lasts. I was wrong, of course, but I wouldn't discover this for years. There are some things that last. It's just that we have to find them. They're hidden among the many other changing and transitory things around us that seem to be pulling at us for our attention. We have to look for them. And once we find them, we need to keep them always before us. Only then will we not be deceived. Only then will we not lose our way. Only then will we know that we have nothing to fear. This is Jesus's point in our gospel this morning, and it's one we especially need to hear right now. The thing is, there seems to be just so much to fear these days. The news is unrelentingly grim. There's political turmoil and war. There's economic instability and climate change. There's division and violence. There's COVID and other diseases. Everything seems out of balance. The whole world seems to have lost its way. And yet, how does Jesus begin his message? With this. Do not be afraid, little flock, he says, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Was Jesus talking about the same world that we know? Was he? Well, yes. The thing is, it's important to remember that Jesus said this while on his way to Jerusalem. That is, on his way to the cross. Before him, he knew he faced betrayal, suffering, and death. In other words, he too knew uncertainty. He too knew division. He too knew violence. And yet even so, he could say it. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. He could say this because he knew what we need. He knew that all we really require are just two things. All we need is this. First, to identify what lasts. Then second, once we found it, to keep it before us always. And how do we do that? Well, as Jesus goes on to say, quote, make purses for yourself that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. And where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. In other words, we really do need to find those things that I had tried so hard to locate when I was 6 years old, the things that last, the things that truly last. As I mentioned, it took me years to discover what those things really are. But now that I have, they seem obvious. Essentially, there are three. First is God, of course. God is and was and will be forever. God is eternal. And because God is love, love is eternal too, as are we, as embodiments of that love. We are God's children, after all, heirs of God's kingdom, living expressions of God's blessing. So these three, God, love, and in our deepest reality, we ourselves, these are what last. These are what we must not lose sight of. These are the things which we must keep always before our eye. You know, when I was 19, I spent the summer as the captain's steward on a merchant marine training ship. My job was to cater to the man responsible for getting us across thousands of miles of open water. I cleaned his room, took care of his clothes, and brought him his meals. I rose every morning at 5:30 a.m., climbed out of my narrow bunk, many decks down in the bowels of the ship, and hurried to the galley, the ship's kitchen, where I assembled all the plates and silverware on a tray and coaxed the busy cooks to set aside whatever they had in time in order to prepare the captain's breakfast. I then rushed up 5 flights of steep stairs to carry the tray to the captain's cabin, which was always empty, and hurriedly arranged the plates on his table before the food had too much time to get cool. With that done, I went up one final flight of stairs to the ship's bridge, a small room with windows on 3 sides. There I'd find the mate at the wheel, and perhaps the first officer. There also I'd find the navigator sitting at his desk with the captain looking over his shoulder. In those days before GPS, they were checking the course. They had to check and check again and again. Everything depended on that. That's because everywhere around us was ocean. Ocean and nothing but ocean. That and sky. There were days when the sea was as calm, as flat as a mirror. It was eerily calm. This was the North Atlantic, however. So most days the waves rose to peaks that could be multi-stories high, so that the horizon seemed to rise and fall violently, up and down, back and forth. There was nothing at all that in that vast openness remotely like a landmark. Everything depended on maintaining that course. Excuse me, sir, I'd say. Your breakfast is ready. The captain would straighten and nod. He'd then invariably say, I'll be right down, Ernie, once we confirm these coordinates. The fact was, nothing had greater priority than that. Nothing was more important than maintaining course, than keeping sight of where we were going. And nothing is more important for us either. That's Jesus's point. Keep your eyes on the prize. Never forget what's essential. Never forget what lasts. God lasts. Love lasts. And as long as we remember that we are part of God and expressions of that love, we last too. We do that by living out that love and making it central to who we are. With that before us, we have nothing to fear. Nothing to fear. God is with us, and we are with God. Before us, we have God's kingdom, and all is well. Amen.